In today's video, we have some NHL trade rumors to discuss involving the Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, Pittsburgh Penguins, and Columbus Blue Jackets, and we have several updates regarding coaches and GM changes possibly coming around the NHL. We'll jump into all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Today we're reviewing a lot of information from Elliotte Friedman's latest 31 Thoughts blogs. It was really loaded with a lot of new and interesting information that we're going to discuss here today. A lot of updates on coaches and GMs as well as some trade rumors. So let's dive in and get started. Now, regarding the Dale Talon situation that we talked about before, the NHL is investigating a racial slur or something to that effect. We don't really have a lot of details on the situation, but obviously the NHL is taking it very seriously. One tidbit of information here to keep in mind as well with this situation is that Dale Talon, of course, when he worked for the Chicago Blackhawks, he had hired Bill Peters to be the American Hockey League coach in Rockford in the AHL level, which is where the Akeem Alou situation took place. Of course, that's where Bill Peters, all those allegations that ended up resulted in him getting fired in Calgary took place. So clearly they want to take this very seriously and cautiously. I'm not sure if there's any kind of links to one to the other or anything of that nature, but they're going to obviously take a look into this and see. But the NHL won't be commenting any further until they have an investigation complete and they're ready to announce the outcome or results or any subsequent consequences. Now, as we've been talking about lately as well, the Florida Panthers are getting closer to naming their new GM, whereas the Arizona situation is going to take a little bit longer, mainly due to the fact that the Arizona ownership group between owner Alex Marullo and his new CEO Xavier Gutierrez aren't as familiar with all the NHL people. Of course, they haven't been in the league all that long. So they need more time to do research, conduct more interviews. So it's going to be a lengthier process, but it will be in place before the NHL Draft. Both teams are looking at a lot of similar people with a few differences. In the case of the Florida Panthers, some more new names, though, have emerged as candidates, including former GM Ron Hextall, another former GM in Mike Gillis, as well as Mark Hunter, who's with the London Knights and, of course, used to work for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Throw that into the mix with all the other names we've already talked about before, including Peter Chiarelli, Sean Burke, you've got John Ferguson Jr., Scott Mellenby, Lawrence Gilman, Mike Fuda, and there's a long list of qualified candidates that they're having a look at here. So we'll see what Florida decides to do. Like I said, they've narrowed things down, but we're still learning about some new candidates in there. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, Chris Drury withdrew his name, is going to remain with the New York Rangers. Many of these same people are being considered with the Arizona job. So we'll see what happens, and hopefully these two GMs will be in place in the not too distant future. Now, in regards to the head coaching job with the Washington Capitals, right now it looks as though Peter Laviolette might be one of the leading contenders. It was confirmed by Elliotte Friedman that the Capitals did reach out and get permission from the Nashville Predators to speak to Laviolette. So he'd have to be near the top of the list considering how long he's been around the NHL and his level of success. Many feel they need an experienced coach like him who can certainly be a good fit there. So no big surprise. Of course, the former head coach Todd Reardon, he is likely going to be considered for some assistant coaching jobs. He may pursue some of the other NHL head coaching vacancies, but there's not really a ton out there, at least not at the moment. But Friedman assumes that there will be interest for him to get an assistant job, possibly back in Pittsburgh, where they kind of cleaned house with the coaching staff of Mike Sullivan. So he did work for the Penguins in the past as well, so there's also some familiarity there. So Reardon likely gets an opportunity, and Laviolette very well could be the new head coach in Washington, but we'll have to wait on that to get confirmation. Friedman did report in his blog that Jacques Martin, one of the assistant coaches in Pittsburgh who was recently let go, was going to be a contender with the New York Rangers to replace Lindy Ruff, who took the head coaching job in New Jersey. And now that actually has been confirmed. I just noticed that through Twitter, announced by the Rangers right before I started recording here, that Jacques Martin is now officially on the staff here with the New York Rangers as an assistant coach. Now, jumping into the NHL trade rumors discussed in this Elliotte Friedman's blog, there's certainly some big ones here. One involves Freddie Anderson of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, it's been no secret that Anderson's name has been out there in the rumor mill. The Maple Leafs have a big decision to make, and it's not really just for the sake of making a change. Anderson's only 1 year removed from being an unrestricted free agent. He's going to find himself on the wrong side of 30. Of course, the team's really tight up against the cap, so they need to save any money they can without hopefully giving up talent, of course, and skill, but it's going to not be easy for the Maple Leafs to make several changes here as they try to rejig this team to be better for next year. Anderson's name has been out there because it's not quite clear if they want to extend him and keep him around longer term or what his demands will be on a new contract. So clearly they have to be cautious with that. So given the fact he's got a year left, they very well could look to move him, and his name has been out there quite a bit. Now, according to Elliotte Friedman, one of the teams that have inquired on Anderson's services is the Carolina Hurricanes. So obviously that's an interesting scenario that could play out, but we'll have to wait and see. Obviously the Hurricanes have made it aware numerous times in the past year that there's a lot of players on the Leafs that they're very interested in. Of course, they were very active when William Nylander was holding out. There was even some talk about them inquiring on Mitch Marner back when his contract wasn't done yet as well. So not really a huge surprise that Carolina would consider a goalie upgrade, as I mentioned before in other of our recent videos. I would not be shocked to find that they would want to make some kind of an upgrade and either Mrazek or Reimer end up getting moved out of the Hurricanes organization for an opportunity at an upgrade. There's a ton of goalies expected to be traded this summer, and there's also a ton that are going to be unrestricted free agents. So there's going to be a lot of goalie movements. Now, of course, he goes on to say here as well that Anderson's not going to be traded just for the sake of being traded, just for the sake of doing something different, that the Maple Leafs are only going to consider this if it's really looked upon as being a major upgrade, and that's going to be difficult to do. So there's a real strong possibility that Anderson does come back, but at the same time, you got to wonder what the odds would be. I mean, the Leafs have been linked to Matt Murray out of Pittsburgh, where he's a restricted free agent, and there's an old connection there between Dubas and Murray from their days in junior in the OHL. So that's been rumored before, but obviously I don't see the Leafs and Hurricanes making a goalie swap, for example. If Anderson were to be traded to Carolina, it would not be just a Mrazek or a Reimer coming back. There would have to be some other pieces in there. Obviously, the Leafs could look to get their first-round pick back that Carolina holds from that Patrick Marleau trade. That would be a possibility. I know they were also involved in the Kapanen conversations as well before he was dealt to the Penguins, and that's what the Leafs were asking for, and they would not bite. So unclear what they would offer up in a Freddie Anderson trade, but Elliot Friedman reports that they are interested and have at least inquired. So we'll see if the Leafs go further down the road of getting closer to trading Anderson, if Carolina will continue to be a player in that or not. Like I said, I don't see another goalie coming back the other way from them. They have Jack Campbell. If they're going to upgrade on Freddie Anderson, I just don't see Mrazek or Reimer being that guy. So there'd have to be a separate deal involved to pick up a goalie in another fashion here. Whether that be acquiring Matt Murray from Pittsburgh, signing a guy like Braden Holt being free agency, or Jacob Markstrom if the Canucks don't re-sign him, something to that effect. Difficult to say, but they're going to have tons of options, and I think they're going to take their time here. There's not going to be a major rush to trade Anderson, at least I wouldn't think so. So we'll see what happens, but if Anderson is available, looks as though the Hurricanes will be contacting the Leafs again for further discussion. Now, speaking of goaltenders being moved, and we already touched on this before, but Elliot Friedman mentions in his blog here that the Columbus Blue Jackets are seriously considering moving a goaltender, but he doesn't just mention Jonas Korpisalo. The other rumors and reports we had seen indicated that Korpisalo could find himself on the move. But Friedman's report indicates that they're looking to move a goalie, and it could be either Korpisalo or Elvis Merzlikins. I mean, Merzlikins was signed to more money than Korpisalo was. They both have shorter-term deals, but Merzlikins is making over $4 million, so it was quite a bit more than Korpisalo. So it kind of depends. I would think Korpisalo would be an easier trade given how he played in the playoffs in his contract. But at the same time, neither one of them are longer-term deals. But the fact of the matter is that the Columbus Blue Jackets need to get more offensive to really stand a chance to be, more of a contender in the Eastern Conference. And they obviously don't have a lot they can move out. I mean, they don't really want to touch their blue line. They could also move it forward like a Josh Anderson. That's a possibility as well, but depends on what the return would be, of course. But in this case now, of course, keep in mind Elvis is also exempt from the expansion draft, so they don't have to protect him. If they decide not to move a goalie, they're not going to be at risk for Seattle to take one. They can protect Korpisalo. Elvis will be exempt, and they can hang on to both. They do have a pretty good group of prospect goalies in their system here as well to consider longer term. So we'll see what happens, but the Blue Jackets apparently are open to moving one or the other for a scoring forward. As I mentioned as well, I want to talk about the Montreal Canadiens. Apparently the Habs have been getting a lot of inquiries on center iceman Philip Deneau, which was mainly a result from the end-of-season interview he conducted, saying that he wasn't really sure what his future held, and that obviously he's seen himself as being more of an offensive forward for the Habs, more of a defensive role that he was more deployed by, given the emergence of guys like Kotkaniemi and Suzuki in the top six. And obviously he's 1 year away from being an unrestricted free agent. And he said he's really worked his way up to being one of the better two-way centers around the NHL. And it was at least in the conversation for the Selke. He was not a finalist, of course, but once the voting's unveiled later on, wouldn't be surprised to find out he's like at least in the top 5 or 6 around for getting the votes there. So he's really done quite well. So obviously, Philip Deneau is garnering a lot of interest. Now, I would think Montreal probably doesn't really want to trade him. I think he's a player that they'd like to keep in the mix, and they probably see him as being more of a number 2, number 3 center. But given where everything's at, they're certainly going to have options. Teams are calling on him. Doesn't mean he gets moved by any means, but certainly going to have plenty of options there. Now, another forward that's been kind of stirring things up a bit lately in the rumor mill is Max Domi. Now, in Domi's case, of course, like I mentioned before, his social media was updated to remove any reference to Montreal, which certainly stirred up some people talking. And now there's talk in Friedman's blog that he's likely going to be changing agents. Now, quite often when players change agents, they're unhappy with what the agent's doing, either negotiating a contract or maybe talking to their existing team about a trade or whatever. So it kind of stirring things up that maybe he does want out of Montreal. Obviously, there's no guarantees that him changing agents really means anything for sure about him leaving the Habs organization, but it's certainly causing a lot more discussion around it. Now, of course, the main links before were him going to Pittsburgh, which again came from Friedman a few weeks back. So we'll see if there's anything more to that. Involving Pittsburgh, though, Friedman does mention in his blog here that forward Jared McCann, who certainly had a low role in their playoff run and was even a healthy scratch on occasion, would be available in any kind of trade that the Penguins look to make for additional changes or upgrades to their organization and their lineup. So not a huge surprise. I mentioned before, if Domi was traded to Pittsburgh, that McCann would probably be the main forward that the Penguins would want to include going back. But obviously, I'm not sure what that would be for the Habs side of things and how acceptable that would be or what the return would be as well. There's been a lot of talk around Domi. We've seen talk about even the Red Wings in a Montreal article suggesting maybe Domi and Victor Mete for Anthony Mantha in Detroit. I mean, that was another swap, like restricted free agent for restricted free agent. Of course, Mantha is a little bit more established as a goal scorer, so perhaps Montreal would have to include something extra. They do have a lot of defensemen, and obviously, a guy like Mete, with Romanov coming in, could become expendable. Maybe that would work out. But either way, it's hard to say what Marc Bergevin in Montreal does. They may not do much of anything, but they're certainly going to be getting a lot of inquiries when it comes to guys like Danault and Domi, and they do have to make some decisions on what kind of role they're going to play with the organization for the next few years, and either get them signed, move them out, or decide what they got to do. So let me know what you think is going to happen on all the items we discussed here today from Elliot Friedman's 31 Thoughts blog. I'd love to know your thoughts down in the comments, and we can continue discussing further. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. And give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.